Imagine a thief whose every action could be the subject of a separate movie. Some of the crimes he committed remain unsolved, but while doing all this, he records his entire life as if he were making a vlog. Yes, it's meaningless. It's a bit difficult to summarize. It's best if I tell you the whole story. His full name was Gerald Daniel Blanchard, and he was born around 1972 in Winnipeg, Canada. I won't dwell on his childhood. He came from a troubled family. They were poor. He lived with his mother, and so on. But in his mother's words, he was definitely a nerd, meaning he was the type who studied a lot and was responsible. And his first offense was stealing milk left at neighbors' doors when there was no milk at home due to poverty. Then, when they realized they couldn't get by there, he moved to America with his mother and brother. But Gerald was a strange kid, you see, and that strangeness would continue as he grew up. But it was obvious even back then. I wouldn't call him shameless or brazen or stupid. He was just a bit of a peculiar type. His appearance didn't match his personality. He was skinny, short, and wore glasses. He didn't stand out. But contrary to his appearance, he was always the leader in any environment he entered, the one who took charge. He was the harmless-looking boy that mothers warned their children not to hang out with. But contrary to his appearance, in high school, he started stealing products from stores and returning them to the same stores to make money. But don't think of small-scale thefts of $50 to $100. He had started to increase the amounts to thousands, even tens of thousands, by making deals with store employees. And this is no joke or exaggeration. He recorded all this with cameras he stole from the stores. Very interesting. I guess no one cared about his appearance. Sometimes he would have someone hold the camera to record him while he took the product from the store and walked out. And I repeat, these weren't small amounts of money. He worked at it like a regular job and made crazy amounts of money, so that by the time he was 16, he had $100,000 in his pocket. This also showed what a devoted son he was. Because he was too young to use the three-figure sums he had earned, he hired a lawyer and even bought his mother a house. Of course, his vlog camera was with him as always, and he didn't neglect to show off the house. The method he found was incredible. He would go to stores like Radio Shack, he would walk around and steal boxes of products, he would put them in his jacket pocket. Somehow he got them out of the store. Then he prepared incredibly realistic receipts as if he had purchased those products himself and took them back for a refund. According to one of his friends who helped him do this, he even made transactions worth $20,000 to $30,000 on some days. And being only 15 or 16 years old, this was just a preview of what was to come in the future. And believe it or not, when this guy turned 30, he would continue to walk around with a camera in his hand and film everything, as you will see shortly. But the future aside, even though he could convince people that he and his friends had bought the house he now lives in for his mother, they gave themselves away when they rented a truck around Easter and tried to clear out almost an entire store again. The police raided the house, ransacked it, and found him in a secret compartment behind the closet where he was hiding. After that, it was off to reform school. But at this point, a teacher he saw as a father figure vouched for him and said at his hearing that he was actually a good kid. Thanks to this vouching, our guy earned the right to conditional release after a few months of reform school. There, he did a lot of sports and started developing new ideas to make his fast life even faster. It was time to expand the business. As you heard, if you ate it, you would stay away from trouble. Of course, this was actually just a fake video he made to convince his teacher, because now it was time to take on bigger jobs. Nowadays, he had moved on from stores like Radio Shack to bigger ones. Clothing companies were doing the same thing with electronics, which were even more expensive per unit. He would steal the watch, print a fake receipt and invoice, and then go return it to different stores around the country. Sometimes, when he brought home piles of stolen goods with his friends, he would lie to his mother, telling her he got them from a garage sale or something. He spent the money himself and also gave it to his teenage friends. He was slowly turning into a young crime boss, and he was doing it without harming anyone or committing violent crimes. Of course, Life couldn't go on like this forever. Even if the grasshopper sometimes jumped 3 times and sometimes 33 times. In April 1993, 21-year-old Gerald Ayova set fire to his friend's car by pouring gasoline on it so that his friend could collect insurance money. He planned to get a share of the insurance money too. However, he didn't know how many liters of gasoline it would take to burn a car, so he poured 40 liters of gasoline on it. The rest of the plan was to go and report the incident to the police after burning the car. But when he did so, reeking of gasoline, the police realized something was fishy and took him into custody. However, Gerald, locked up in the interrogation room at the police station, wasn't going to sit idle. After his statement was taken, the police left. It was past midnight and most of the police had finished their shift. But while waiting in the interrogation room, he thought it was too quiet. First, he climbed from the table in the interrogation room to the suspended ceiling and closed the hole he had come out of. If he escaped immediately, he could be caught, so he decided to wait a while in the ceiling. When one of the police officers who had taken his statement came to the interrogation room and saw that it was empty, he immediately made an announcement and told all the teams that the child had escaped. Of course, no one knew that he was still in the attic and watching their panic in full HD. His escape alerted the SWAT teams, and they joined the investigation. A few hours later, when the station closed, our kid jumped down from the attic where he was hiding. More interestingly, instead of running away, he found the desk of the detective who had questioned him at the closed police station. He took the family photo from the desk. He drew a smiley face on the bullet he found in the drawer and left it on the detective's desk before escaping. That's the kind of messed up kid he was. But after his escape, he went to his mother's house. That was the problem. The reason I can't say Gerald was a very smart man is that after making such a clever move, he made such a stupid decision. In his mind, the detective should have realized he was too smart to be stupid enough to go to his mother's house. And when the teams raided his mother's house in the early hours of the morning, he was caught again and sat back down in the VIP seat of the police car, naked. But this time he would be taken to the central police station, not the town station. So he was in quite a bit of trouble. The officer who took him in had been told to be careful and that this kid had escaped from the station the night before. The police confirmed this and took him to headquarters, parking the car in the station's underground parking lot. According to procedure, he first had to get out of the car and report that he had brought in the suspect. However, when the officer got out of the vehicle, Gerald somehow managed to turn his handcuffed hands around from behind and got into the driver's seat of the police vehicle, which still had the keys in it. He then lightly bumped into the officer who had brought him there and who had only just realized what he was doing and began to drive away from the police station in a stolen police vehicle. He was wanted with 4 stars and such, and catching someone moving around in a police car naked at the age of 21 probably shouldn't have been that difficult. So much so that while trying to return to the town he had fled from in the car, he got cornered, and despite trying to jump out of the speeding car with his already handcuffed hands and run away, he gave himself away again. And this time, he was both a repeat offender and had a long record. Thus, our man was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and after serving 4 years for good behavior, was deported in 1997 and sent back to his homeland Canada. He was banned from entering the US for 5 years, which he deserved. So he had spilled the milk and had experienced unpleasant events. Winnipeg was a city in Canada with a population of 700,000, and it had become the new home of Gerald, the unruly, unstoppable, shameless 25-year-old. As a master of survival, he would not neglect to establish himself there, even without a penny to his name or anyone he knew. The customs officers took pity on him and gave him $10 so he could get on the bus. He bought a camera for $9 and photocopied the receipt for 10 cents, creating new receipts for his return strategy while continuing to steal cameras and getting away with it again. He had hidden one camera, which he used to continue filming his vlogs, as you saw. Over time, he had managed to earn enough money to rent a house, buy a car, and gradually transition into a luxurious lifestyle. Of course, he re-established his circle and continued scamming people in malls with his new friends, finding contraband goods and selling them under the table. Money meant more money, and in one of these luxurious circles, he had met a wealthy girl. For some reason, they got along very well and got married shortly after. The girl's father was a German businessman and a highly respected man. Within this picture of a happy family, Gerald had arranged a European tour with his wife and beloved father-in-law. Of course, he hadn't told either his wife or his father-in-law that he had more than 20 identities and was a super-duper con artist. Or maybe he had just skipped over that little detail. But right now, the European tour was what mattered. So much so that after France, Germany, and so on, our folks had arrived in Vienna, the capital of Austria. Actually, Gerald's plan had been to come here from the beginning, because there was a very special exhibition at Schönbrunn Palace, where a priceless diamond and pearl-encrusted, 10-pointed star-shaped hairpin belonging to the Austrian Empress Elizabeth, also known as Sisi, was on display. This jewel was like a national treasure for the Austrians. In fact, the hairpin was one of the last 2 remaining examples in the world of the 10 stars worn by the Empress. So, it was already very valuable because of its jewels. However, its rarity made it much more valuable, and as you might expect, this star greatly attracted Gerald. Normally, it was displayed on a special stand connected to an alarm system and weight sensor inside a bulletproof glass display case with high security measures. The armed security guards patrolling the palace were another matter. But Gerald was Gerald after all. Using his father-in-law's respected position in the business world, they had made a special request to the palace authorities. The exhibition at the palace was opening tomorrow, but since they were respectable people happily touring Europe, could they see this rare piece today so as not to deviate from their plans? Could they become a reality thanks to the influential father-in-law enlisting the help of a few influential friends there? Thus, the innocent Gerald and his family, whose VIP preview request had been accepted, began touring the exhibition. While Gerald appeared to be listening intently as the guide recounted the history of the star in the mist, his mind was on the security system of the display case. He had scanned the positions of the motion sensors in the corners, examined the type of screws in the glass display case, and noticed the massive windows and thick curtains in the high-ceilinged room. The moment the guide moved to the next room, Gerald pulled out his vlog camera, as he always did, and quickly began filming the room where the star was displayed. Meanwhile, without anyone noticing, he took a mini screwdriver out of his pocket and began loosening the screws on the display case. He gently wiggled the screws, adjusting their tightness so as not to trigger the alarm mechanism. Then, without drawing attention, he unlocked one of the room's windows, leaving it slightly ajar, and returned to his wife and beloved father-in-law within seconds. After that, the second phase of the plan had already begun. He stopped by the palace gift shop and bought one of the replica star brooches on sale. That evening, it was time to take action. He had already arranged for a German pilot acquaintance to fly him in a small plane over Vienna. Yes, what you're thinking is about to happen. When he reached the palace's jump location, he got the pilot's approval, jumped out of the plane, and managed to land with his parachute on the very top of the 1,441-room giant building without anyone noticing. Don't say it's a lie, because there's more. He took a sturdy rope out of his backpack and tightly wrapped one end around the marble column on the roof. Now he was ready to sneak in through the window he had left open during the day. There were only a few guards on duty in the huge palace, but they were in other wings of the building. He entered through the window and walked slowly towards the exhibition room. He had also taken the motion sensors into account, knowing that if he moved very slowly, the alarm would not go off. When he reached the display case, the screws he had loosened during the day were still in place. Using a small greasy knife, he pulled from his coat. He gripped the rods holding the screws and quietly turned the last few turns, managing to lift the glass case without triggering the alarm. He removed the fake star brooch he had acquired that morning and, holding his breath, simultaneously lifted the original brooch from its place, and replaced it with the fake one with his other hand. The alarm did not sound, and the weight sensor did not detect the change. Thus, Gerald had managed to acquire the star of his beloved Sisi with a legendary operation and 0 errors, worthy of a movie. Now, first of all, don't shake it. If you did, take it back, because you actually heard the story of this museum heist from Gerald himself, and Sisi's star really was stolen. When morning came and the exhibition opened, and even for several days after the incident, no one noticed that Sisi's star had been stolen. But when the matter became clear after a few days, the police and government officials were alerted. After the Star Bank robbery, he tried to lay low for a while, but he couldn't stay away from crime for long. Soon after, he separated from his wife, whom he supposedly loved, having achieved his goal, and returned to his fast-paced life. Since he was banned from entering the US, he spent his time in Canada and other countries. He was tired of just eating, drinking, and traveling, and was looking for some excitement. In 2001, while driving around Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, he noticed a new bank branch under construction. It was a branch of a bank called Alberta Treasury, and it was still preparing to open. Also, in his opinion, a bank under construction meant a bank that had not yet implemented full security measures. So he rented a room in the building opposite the bank under construction and began his patient preparations. Gerald would go in and out of the construction site for weeks until the bank building was completed. Sometimes he would wear a worker's uniform and go to the construction site during the day with documents in his hand, and sometimes he would sneak in through the back windows in the dark of night. He had planned the 8-dimensional chess heist when there was no money in the bank and security levels were quite low. He had secretly removed the locks from the ATM room and ATMs while they were still under construction, learned their model numbers, and then found identical ones to work on the locks at home. Since he had entered the construction site, he also had the bank's blueprint. Thus, he had gone over all the details countless times. Which cable is where? What does the security camera capture? How long does it take to blow up one ATM and move on to the next? How many seconds does it take to enter and exit? How far away is the police station? He placed tiny listening devices in the room where the ATMs would be installed and set up receivers that allowed him to access the cables and monitor the data remotely. He bought or stole a baby monitor from a store, positioned it so it could see the ATMs, and set up a system that provided him with a 24/7 live feed. He now had detailed information on who came and went, the security level, how much money the ATMs held, and what would happen the night before the opening. After months of patience and preparation, everything was ready. The day before the bank opened, the ATMs had been filled with cash by the company, and they were waiting for the opening hour. Interestingly, according to police statements, there were no security guards at the bank that night. Gerald began the robbery he had been preparing for weeks by climbing onto the bank's roof as he had planned, removing the ventilation vent he had loosened beforehand, and diving inside. He had already tampered with the bank's security cable sensors. He had also been working on the ATM room door and the ATM locks for months, so within minutes, he managed to blow up the cash-filled ATMs, steal over $500,000 in cash, and copy the security camera recordings before escaping. The scene that greeted the police who arrived after the alarms went off was very normal. The doors and windows were intact, and there were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. Given this, and since the bank was about to open, they assumed the alarms had gone off due to an error by the security company and left the scene. That's how it was. Gerald had managed to steal the money from the ATMs of the bank, which was not yet open, with months of patience and a robbery that took only minutes, as easily as taking butter from a knife. But, as in most robberies, he had overlooked one detail. For his escape plan, he had left his car in the parking lot of a shopping mall behind the bank that morning. And although he was unaware of it, the mall's night security was also responsible for recording the license plates of cars left in the parking lot overnight. So when the incident came to light and an investigation was launched, the police were able to access the license plate number of the car that had been parked in the parking lot behind the bank at night and then disappeared. After checking the license plate, it turned out that the car had been rented by someone named Dan G. Blanchard. There you go. That's what I'm saying. Why would a man with over 20 identities rent the car he arranged for the robbery plan under his own name? Gerald was quite an unusual man, but revealing his name wouldn't be enough to catch him yet. Gerald had learned of the car's appearance on the island through the listening devices he had planted in the bank, of course, and he had tried to confuse the detectives investigating the case by calling them. He would call the police from secret numbers, saying he was part of the robbery team, that they had planned the robbery with the workers building the bank, but that he had been kicked out of the team and was reporting the situation. He was pinning the blame on bank employees and contractors, using information that was supposedly only known to the police, which he was monitoring via camera. He was manipulating the investigation, increasing the number of suspects from 5 to 55. After doing this for a while, he began robbing more banks across the country, feeling confident that he had thrown off the target: Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton. Gerald traveled from city to city, continuing to rob banks and ATMs in different ways. Although the police did not believe it could be a single perpetrator, they closely monitored a person named Dan, whose name appeared on the license plate. Of course, he was getting driver's licenses and passports. To make it more realistic, he even attended university classes with some of his fake IDs. He had wigs, fake beards, contact lenses, and the number of IDs he possessed continued to grow every day. One day he was a real estate agent, the next a lawyer, the next a bartender. He kept making vlogs, spending money wildly, and living a dream life. He had set up a small arsenal of burglary tools in his home. Night vision cameras, high-powered receivers capable of picking up sound and image signals from meters away, and scanner devices that could decode police radio frequencies were all present. The specially made burglary bag always contained ropes, hooks, uniforms from various institutions, mini cameras, and listening devices. And as I said, he did the robberies not only for the money, but also for the thrill. So much so that when he got bored, he would engage in frivolous activities like mingling with celebrities. Once he prepared fake press cards and VIP passes and snuck into the NHL hockey finals as a special guest. Another time, he drove alongside legendary race car drivers like Mario Andretti at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was chatting side by side with the Princess of Monaco at a yacht race in Monte Carlo, and at a pop concert, he was asking questions to Cristiano Ronaldo as if he were a reporter. His adrenaline addiction had driven him to the brink of madness. It would later emerge that Gerald had opened dozens of bank accounts in different countries using at least 13 different fake identities. The money accumulated in these accounts financed his and his girlfriend's friends' expenses for planes, yachts, and nightlife, boosting his confidence to the max. Time passed, and he continued to sustain his lavish lifestyle with robberies. But sometimes things go wrong, my dear. One night, while in his home country, he needed cash and thought he could quickly get it by cutting open an ATM with a spiral cutter. Who knows if he was out of his mind? But when he covered the machine with a tarp and dove in with the cutter, he hadn't considered that the machine had a hidden alarm system. He didn't hear the police arriving while he was cutting with the spiral saw, and after the shouting, he realized he was caught. But he was prepared. He detonated the smoke bomb he had brought with him. Yes, the smoke bomb outside the tarp. Then he managed to escape the police surrounding him by disappearing into the smoke. No, not quite. The police had surrounded him and arrested him, even though the area was filled with smoke. Unfortunately, this part is absurd, but true. He was released on bail of a few $1,000s because he hadn't committed the crime, meaning he hadn't stolen the money, and because he was caught with a fake ID. The police didn't know it was fake. Since there was no criminal record on that fake ID, he was released on bail in this case as well. In his own words, if he had been in the US, he could have faced decades in prison. But under Canadian law, one of the key criteria was whether the offender had used violence. And as you can see, ours was not a violent type. And so our part-time vlogger, full-time thief, was back on the streets. Amidst all this glitz and glamour, Gerald was racing toward the peak of his criminal career, But he had no idea that the detectives newly assigned to the bank robbery, where his license plate was found, would be fixated on him. That the spotlight would turn even more toward him because similar robberies had occurred at several banks across the country, or that his phones would soon be tapped. Mitch McCormick and his partner, Larry Levasseur, experienced detectives in their 50s with the Winnipeg Police, had heard about these bank robberies and, intrigued, had taken over the case, which was about to be closed. They had Gerald's real name, information about the car he rented, and his past criminal record. But when they conducted a thorough investigation, a huge map of a criminal network began to emerge. Facial recognition systems were just emerging, and as the investigations progressed and the systems developed, countless interconnected names, fake identities, companies, and properties appeared before them. So there was this guy. His description was the same, but his names were quite different, and they soon discovered that Gerald had over 30 fake names. There were fake passports, houses in different cities, luxury cars, and they had noted all of this down and connected the dots. This allowed them to obtain special permission from the court to wiretap all of this person's phones and launch an operation they called the Kite Operation. And when this permission was granted, the detectives were even more shocked. Because when they started listening, Gerald was talking very casually. The detectives thought they would have to decode encrypted messages, but that wasn't the case at all. Our genius thief was spilling everything during months of wiretapping. In just the second week of listening, the detectives heard incredible things. In one call, Gerald was instructing several of his men to commit product return fraud at the Best Buy electronics store. Another time, he was bragging about how he had made this money and that money, and one day he even mentioned a crime he had been involved in the past, which was the robbery of Sisi Star. Since 1998, this man had been the prime suspect in an unsolved theft case, unless he was shaking his phone. While Gerald was unaware of everything and going about his daily life, 18 different phone lines were being monitored and recorded moment by moment by countless officers. Although his whereabouts were unknown, the button was about to be pressed to catch him when an important detail reached the ears of the police. By November 2006, in a phone conversation they listened to as part of the Kite Project, a man with a thick British accent called Gerald on November 16, 2006, saying, "Hello, Denny. Are you ready? I have a job for you. How soon can you get to Cairo?" Danny was short for Daniel, Gerald's middle name, and it was clear that his foreign partners knew him by that name. With this call, a whole new door opened for the police. Gerald was about to embark on a major operation with an international crime ring, and if they caught him immediately, they would not be able to reach the gang. Thus, orders came from above and the wiretapping continued. Gerald referred to the person he spoke to on the phone as boss and did not use his name or know it. And again, the person he spoke to, the boss, was quite cautious in his communication, unlike Gerald, and avoided giving details on the phone. According to the wiretaps, the boss was a Kurd of Middle Eastern origin. The reason he called Gerald was a major heist to be carried out in Cairo, the capital of Egypt. He had told our guy to immediately assemble a team and come to Cairo. The job involved using over 1,000 stolen credit cards provided by the boss to withdraw as much cash as possible from ATMs on the streets of Cairo and then disappearing. Gerald immediately set out to find 2 friends for this crazy international job. However, he didn't have many friends he could trust for a job of this scale. He called Angela James, whom he knew from past refund scams, and somehow convinced her to join him. But he couldn't find a second person. The people he called were either unavailable or didn't want to get involved in such a big job. So ours wanted to try his neighbor too. There was a young man named Balume Kachongwe, originally from Congo, who lived in the same apartment building in Vancouver. Gerald explained the situation to him, and the neighbor immediately accepted the offer. The risk was minimal, and easy money was always the best option. So the 3-person card skimming team hopped on a flight to Cairo and headed for Egypt. The Winnipeg police couldn't believe their ears, but they were monitoring these conversations and preparations in real time. However, since they had their eyes fixed on the boss, they couldn't touch Gerald. The boss and his crew's modus operandi was often the same. They would install hidden devices on the credit card payment terminals of stores and businesses, stealing thousands of card details. They would then print this information onto magnetic cards to produce counterfeit credit cards. After that, they would max out the daily cash withdrawal limit on each card and disappear. That was exactly what Gerald and his new crew were going to do in Cairo. The team arrived in Cairo and settled into the luxurious Marriott Hotel on the banks of the Nile River. The boss's men came to the hotel the next day and handed them approximately 1,000 cloned credit cards. Those participating in the operation would be divided into pairs. Balame from Congo and the Kurdish youths were in one group, while Gerald and Angela were in the other. To avoid attracting attention, they wore sheets and began the operation. The team was now working 12-hour days. They didn't think there would be a security issue because Egypt's banking system was weak at the time. They withdrew Egyptian pounds from every ATM they found, up to the limits, and filled their bags and suitcases. Of course, the vlog continued, but most importantly, the teams in Canada continued to monitor the messages and emails second by second. When they saw the piles of cash in the hotel rooms reaching heights of 1.5 to 2 meters, and that they had collected millions of dollars in just a few days, they were stunned. But there was a problem. Since ATM limits in Egypt were low, they couldn't withdraw large amounts of cash at once. That's why Gerald had come up with a different strategy. In this new plan he had devised on his own, he had assigned his Congolese companion, Balume, a task. He had given the man over 50 cards and told him to fly to Nairobi, Kenya. Perhaps the ATMs there could dispense more money at once, making the job almost half as easy. However, Gerald had devised this plan without questioning how reliable the person he trusted was, because when he put his teammate on the plane, that was the last time he saw him. Balume disappeared with the cards, never to return. The operation continues. The money was brought to the hotel, but there was no word from Balume. And since Gerald had made this plan without consulting his boss, when the man didn't return for a while, he had no choice but to tell his boss about his mistake. And when his boss heard this, he was absolutely furious. So our guy was taken hostage. He was left in the heart of Cairo with a girlfriend, accompanied by his boss's men. This incident had already kind of canceled the plan. It's unclear how Gerald convinced his boss during those hot days in Cairo, but according to phone records, he must have convinced him by giving him his share, because they managed to return to Canada together with the girl. But now he owed his boss, and that debt would cost him dearly. Gerald returned home to Vancouver via London in December 2006, and since he hadn't received his share from the last job, he planned a new one as soon as he arrived. After months of searching, his target was, of course, banks again. This time, the target was a Nova Scotia bank branch opening in a town 100 kilometers east of Vancouver. According to his calculations, if the plan went smoothly, he could make off with nearly $1 million from there. Meanwhile, the detectives had been working almost around the clock, digging deeper into the case after his return home. They learned that the boss's team would be landing at Montreal Airport the next day for a different job. However, the detectives made a mistake here, thinking they could catch the boss's men, interrogate them, and find out where the boss was. But the team that arrived didn't say a word, and the officers could only deport them. It was this mistake that led the boss to learn that something was going on. One night, while Gerald was scouting for the new bank heist I mentioned earlier, his phone rang, and it was the boss calling. He was asking Gerald how his men had been caught, still furious. When the detectives listening to these conversations realized he was at a bank 100 kilometers away and that they couldn't reach the boss, they pressed the button. Orders had come from above, and now they wanted to catch this man who was sneaking into every bank like a mouse. Clearly, the boss couldn't be reached. All email records, all conversations, and all messages had been examined, and the addresses of all his accomplices with whom he had communicated within Canadian borders had been found. All that remained was to find Gerald, and when they scanned for signals around the newly opened bank branch, the location of his home was also identified. In the early hours of January 23, 2007, a 12-person SWAT team was deployed in Vancouver, and the operation was carried out simultaneously. Both Gerald and the 10-plus people in Canada who were involved in the crimes with him were caught in simultaneous raids. The evidence seized by the police was like a treasure chest. When Gerald's homes and warehouses were searched, a full 10 pallets of materials were seized. Among these items were over 60,000 documents, fake IDs, passports, bank documents, large amounts of cash in various currencies, smoke bombs, several weapons, over 300 electronic devices, card skimming machines, card readers, and all kinds of hidden cameras and listening devices. It was found in a secret room during a search of his luxury apartment in Vancouver. Hidden behind a wall panel, this room contained burglary equipment neatly arranged on shelves. In addition, a list and documents of all the fake IDs Gerald had used were filed away. It was like a crime museum. Gerald would initially be brought to court on 41 separate charges: theft, forgery, fraud, possession of forgery tools. The list was quite extensive, covering everything imaginable. Because this time, the circumstances were different. The police had seized everything. They even had 120 video and audio tapes containing Gerald's own vlogs. So he knew that even if he escaped, he couldn't hide and would be caught. Perhaps for the first time, he had also felt a deep sense of exhaustion, thinking, "Enough, I'm tired." That's why he hadn't even attempted to escape. When his partner Angela started singing like a canary, he seemed to realize it was time for him to talk too. The bill of indictment revealed that even under Canada's lenient laws, he would serve approximately 168 years. Gerald had hit rock bottom. But this mad genius had one more card up his sleeve. He offered the detectives a deal. He asked them how much time he would get if he told them everything he had done up to that point, revealed all the security loopholes, returned all the money he had stolen from the banks, and most importantly, gave them Sisi's star. The detectives heard that he had never committed a violent crime, and that because he would reveal all his methods, they could never be replicated by others. Most importantly, they would gain a tremendous diplomatic advantage by acquiring Sisi's jewel. When they heard this, the atmosphere suddenly became strange. Suddenly, this thief's 168-year-old crime became the star of the show. The news that the detectives who found this priceless jewel were working in a small town in Canada would echo throughout the global media. And this was a tremendous opportunity for both their egos and their positions. Thus began a rather lengthy confession process. According to Gerald, as I explained, he had indeed stolen the jewel by parachuting in. He also described how he had entered dozens of banks and said he had hidden the jewel in his grandmother's basement, and the star was indeed there. For over a month, Gerald had explained everything he had done to the police, almost as if he were teaching them a lesson. He corrected the mistakes the police had made and clarified the points they couldn't solve. It was as if a magician was revealing the secrets of all his tricks. The technical information he provided was so effective that detectives compiled it and prepared an 8-hour conference presentation for the banking and police communities. On November 7, 2007, the case against Gerald Blanchard was concluded at the Manitoba Provincial Court. Gerald accepted 16 separate charges in exchange for the release of all his friends and, as part of the agreement, received a huge reduction in his sentence, receiving only 8 years in prison. Gerald's lawyer also read a statement from his client. "My client is very pleased that the big lie he has been living for years has finally come to an end." The statement thanked the male and female police officers in Winnipeg for making this possible, and if you will, he was sorry. Anyway, that was the story of one of the world's strangest but best thieves, which began with stealing milk. How had he not been caught until now? That was the real question, I think. Also, the teams hadn't been able to find the neighbor who had run away to the boss in Nairobi, but Gerald had somehow been tried anyway. And the funniest part was that our guy had served 5 years for good behavior and was released. When he got out, he had decided to live a clean life and started working as a security consultant. But for some reason, he developed an interest in exotic animals and then started doing photography too. But hold on tight, In 2017, he was caught trying to steal a PlayStation from a Best While store under the name Rick White. He didn't receive a severe punishment for this minor incident, but it still revealed what kind of person he was. He hadn't changed his ways. How he actually stole the star would remain unknown until he told the story himself. As always, take care until the next video.